In this module, we shall learn the role of expectations in effectiveness of policy. Irregular fluctuations in economic activity as measured by aggregate production and employment are a persistent characteristics of market economies. The monetarists have viewed these fluctuations in a different way. The classicals as well as the Friedmanists believe in the working of the quantity theory of money and therefore formulate all their policies around those relationships. Actually, they follow a partial equilibrium approach as they consider the interaction between demand and supply of money in isolation with demand and supply of other goods and factors in rest of the economy. But Friedman shifted the focus from the demand for money and constant velocity of the labor market and the issue of full employment. He tried to establish relationship between the expected inflation and wage inflation. He argued that in every economy there is a natural rate of unemployment which is consistent with zero rate of wage inflation. But Friedman did not analyze the fluctuations around the natural rate of unemployment other than those induced by the government policy. He did not analyze how the private sector or the market behaves in a self-correcting manner even under the conditions of imperfect information or other market rigidities. On the other hand, Lucas has used the general equilibrium method and emphasized that equilibrium in the money market must be viewed in coordination with the equilibrium in other sectors of the economy. He says that the misspecifications in one part of the model representing whole of the economy affects all other parts and therefore there is a need of a consistent and accurate model. Lucas' version is termed as new classical. This approach gives strong policy implications. The foundations of Lucas' version actually lie in the notion of rational expectations. In this context, let us first try to understand the concept of rational expectations. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the concept of rational expectations, explore the role of expectations in effectiveness of policy, understand the idea of Lucas' critic, examine the actual behavior of the governments under given political and strategic considerations. First, we will discuss the rational expectations. In simple terms, rational expectations are the expectations which people make as consumers as well as producers by keeping in mind all the information about all the parameters over a period of time. In case of rational expectations, the mean of expectational error is assumed to be 0. Hence, in the rational expectation equilibrium, markets clear themselves and neither the monetary policy nor the fiscal policy changes have any effect on output. Thus, the models based on rational expectations predict the irrelevance of the policy. Lucas' model, however, discusses some transitory deviations from the full employment and these deviations are the result of expectational errors. They are said to be transitory as they last only as long as the errors last and the errors cannot stay forever. Therefore, these deviations are eliminated as the errors are eliminated. Moving on, the rational expectations and policy ineffectiveness. In case of rational expectations, people make decisions by using all the information and any deviations from the natural rate of unemployment can occur as a result of surprises or say unforeseeable and unpredictable events. Any systematic policy can be fully anticipated and hence neutralized through the price responses. Thus, according to Sargent and Wallace, 1976, the changes in output can be made only through befooling the people for some time. This can be understood through Lucas' aggregate supply and aggregate demand function. The aggregate demand is function of expected real interest rate, that is the nominal interest rate or capital RT, and the expected change in general price level, that is ET minus 1, PT minus 1 minus ET minus 1 into PT. This can be represented as YTD is equal to RT minus the expected change in the price level. The aggregate supply function is actually Lucas price function which is given as YTS is equal to Y star plus alpha into PT minus ET minus 1 into PT. Here Y star is the natural rate of output. The term PT minus ET minus 1 PT shows the expectational errors in prices, and alpha shows the total number of firms or production units in the economy. Further, in the money market, the demand for money depends upon income YT, price PT, and nominal interest RT. That affects nominal money balances, that is MTD according to a fixed parameter, that is chi. Hence, the demand for money function can be written as MTD is equal to PT plus YT minus chi into RT. In each time period, the government provides additional supply of money to the extent of the difference between the output last year and the natural rate of output. That is MTS is equal to nu into YT minus 1 minus Y star plus ET. Here nu is the feedback term, which is the systematic part of monetary policy. This is also termed as a policy parameter, as it shows the decision of the monetary policy that to what extent the gap between the actual output and the natural output is to be plugged in each year. The equilibrium in money market shows the equality of demand for money and supply of money, that is MTD is equal to MTS, or PT plus YT minus chi into RT is equal to nu into YT minus 1 minus Y star plus ET, or RT is equal to 1 upon chi multiplied with PT plus YT minus nu into YT minus 1 minus Y star plus ET. Now equating the aggregate demand and aggregate supply as given in equation 1 and 2, we get Y star plus alpha into PT minus ET minus 1 into PT is equal to RT minus ET minus 1 into PT plus 1 minus ET minus 1 into PT. Substituting the value of RT from equation 5, we can find the expressions in terms of prices, natural rate of output, expected prices and other parameters in the model such as nu, chi and alpha. However, in case of rational expectations, the value of nu is equal to 1. That is, the money supply is just equal to the difference in actual output and the natural rate of output. In order to simplify the above expression of equilibrium in equation 6, we may use Muth's method, where prices are split into equilibrium values and part due to shocks, that is ET, ET minus 1, ET minus 2 weighted with their time weights. Thus, PT is equal to P bar plus phi 0 into ET plus phi 1 into ET minus 1 plus phi 2 into ET minus 2 plus so on. And ET minus 1 into PT is equal to P bar plus phi 1 ET minus 1 plus phi 2 ET minus 2 and so on. This implies that PT minus ET minus 1 into PT is equal to phi 0 ET. Substituting this value in equation 6, it will be obvious that the output becomes unaffected by the operations of the systematic monetary policy, as policy parameter nu will disappear from the equation. Note that if ET minus 1 into PT is equal to P bar plus phi 1 ET minus 1 plus phi 2 ET minus 2 and so on, and also ET minus 1 into PT plus 1 is equal to P bar plus phi 1 ET minus 1 plus phi 2 ET minus 2 and so on, and hence the difference of the two would be equal to 0. Therefore, RT is equal to Y star plus alpha into phi 0 into ET. Therefore, in the final solution, when all the errors are eliminated, the Lucas supply function will be YT is equal to Y star plus alpha into phi 0 into ET. We can see that nu does not appear. Therefore, the systematic monetary policy operating through nu has no role in the final equilibrium and cannot affect the level of output. The only option left to the government is to adopt a no systematic monetary policy or a surprise policy. But that too will be able to change the output or force it to deviate from the natural rate of output temporarily, as with time, with new information, the expectations will be revised accordingly and the economy will be back to track of natural rate of output. So, instead of having a systematic policy, the government may act randomly to influence the level of output, but this ultimately jeopardizes the welfare of the masses through increased prices. This can be understood with help of the figure. The figure shows that the initial equilibrium is reached at point E, where original aggregate demand curve AD0 intersects the original aggregate supply curve AS0 at the natural rate of output Y star. In case of an unanticipated monetary shock, the aggregate demand curve shifts upwards and there is no change in the aggregate supply as producers were not able to register the increase in prices. New equilibrium is attained at point F. It gives a temporary boost to the output and increases it to Y1. But as the information about the changes in prices enters the information set, the aggregate supply curve also rises to AS1 and new equilibrium is reached at higher prices but at the natural rate of output. This shows that the monetary shock has failed to increase output in the economy in the long run. Let us now discuss the Lucas critic. Lucas was very critical of the econometric based macroeconomic models used for policy evaluation in the 60s. In this respect, he made an argument popularly known as the Lucas critic, in which he stated that a well-specified economic model has two kinds of parameters. These are the structural parameters such as time preference, the tendencies of risk aversion, the parameters of production functions, etc., which are likely to remain stable over time. These parameters actually do not change with the change in policy stances. Then there is a second set of parameters which, unlike the structural parameters, quickly respond to the policy changes. For example, during recession, people respond very quickly if they expect a strong counter-cyclical monetary policy. The first set of parameters are called the deep parameters and the second set is known as the expectational parameters. Lucas says that the models based on interaction of IS and LM curves are faulty in their methodology. As with monetary and fiscal changes, the slope as well as the positions of the IS and LM curves change with the complex interaction of deep and expectational parameters. Since the ISLM approach ignores these interactions, therefore the results of these models cannot be relied upon. Lucas emphasizes on understanding the micro foundations of macroeconomics in order to have a deep analysis of macroeconomic policy. The microeconomic analysis tells us the dynamics of any macroeconomic policy and how the expectations are formed. Understanding these dynamics is very important for a deeper probe of macroeconomic policy and its effects. Lucas therefore says that the expectations should not be treated as exogenous but as endogenous to the model that they influence. Further, we discuss the political and strategic considerations and the fiscal restraints. We have seen that under rational expectations it is difficult to befool the people and hence they change their decisions in response to the policy changes, resulting in ineffectiveness of policy in changing the level of output. But still there are few rays of hope which may lead the policy makers to make such strategies that result in some desirable results. Actually, the ineffectiveness of policy, as pointed out by Lucas and Sargent and Wallace, is based on the assumption that both the public and the private sectors have access to same information set. In reality, the government collects most of the key information, out of which only a certain amount is revealed to the public. Moreover, the government also has a time advantage in getting this information. Due to this informational and time advantage, the government is in a capacity to systematically affect the output through the monetary as well as the fiscal policy. So, with such type of strategies, the systematic policy can be effective. There is another view that the policy can also be effective through supplying partial information to the public, even though the information set is same for the policymakers and the general public. With a strategy of partial information, the public can always be surprised and the systematic policy can bring the desired results. Further, the automatic stabilizers like taxes and transfer payments also have the capacity to establish a systematic policy which is capable to influence output away from the natural rate of output. Actually, regarding the ineffectiveness of the theory, the conservatives say that since the policy ultimately fails to change the output from its natural rate and the rational expectations are simply market clearing, therefore the government should restrain itself from any type of interference. But this is the normative behavior. But there also exists a positive theory which states that how the government actually behave. This theory states that the actual behavior of the government generally deviates from the normative behavior due to several political and strategic considerations. The political structure has its own business cycle. In order to woo the voters or say to be politically wise, to be back in power, the government uses some populist measures, especially just before the election. There are several studies which show policy expansions or no fiscal restraints just before the elections and policy contractions or the fiscal restraints after the elections are over. The fiscal restraints are next to impossible during the war times or even internal disturbances. In any democratic setup, no government can ever give preference to austerity measures over external and internal peace. The austerity measures are also difficult to follow for the coalition governments. The empirical evidence shows that as compared to the single party government, the coalition governments actually end up with greater budget deficits when they are required to reduce it. Some studies also indicate that in countries where the political power changes frequently, we can generally find expansionary fiscal policies. The incumbent party generally knows that its successor will be its opponent. Therefore, it spends laboriously on populist measures and leave a huge deficit for the successors, and this process goes on endlessly. Moreover, the politicians are mainly conscious about their current performance and they hardly care about the adjustments in the later time periods when they may or may not be in the office. Thus, they may indulge in borrowing and spending spree without caring about the capacities to repay in future time period. Finally, Sachs and Larian have pointed out that the weak governments are unable to control inflation as well as the fiscal deficits. They generally do not have enough political support or the institutions to support their decisions. Under such circumstances, they find it difficult to resist the pressures from different stakeholders from different sectors of the economy and tend to increase the spending in attempt to make peace with each of them. But the irony is that the weak governments are not generally able to mobilize resources, especially through taxation or other fees. This generates a huge fiscal deficit that sets stage for a very high inflation. Thus, we can say that even though people follow rational expectations and the normative theory states that the government should not unnecessarily indulge itself in huge fiscal deficit which leads to inflation, in reality, due to several political and strategic considerations, the governments do adopt the expansionary monetary and fiscal policies. Let us now summarize what we have learned in this module. The rational expectations are based upon the information about all the parameters in a given model. Therefore, the decisions based on rational expectations are market clearing in themselves. Thus, the agents in the economic system have perfect information except for the purely stochastic disturbances. Therefore, any systematic policy change is already part of the information set of these agents, and therefore they do not deviate from their natural rate of output. This points towards the ineffectiveness of the policy. However, in real life, the governments have several political and strategic considerations. Therefore, even though the normative theory suggests them not to follow any expansionary policy, they do indulge in expansionary fiscal policy to woo the voters. There are evidences that it is difficult to follow the fiscal restraints in case of threats to internal and external security. Coalition governments and weak governments, and even just before the elections in the country. Hence, in real life, even though the agents behave in a rational manner and have perfect information about the system, the government's actual behavior may deviate from the normative behavior.